welcome to Political Insider. I'm Brett Smith, your humble host. Joining me today is a good friend. He's an author and content manager from Bongino Report. He's Matt Palumbo.
Thanks for having me on, Brett.
You bet. You describe George Soros as the most dangerous man in America. For those that hear George Soros and don't know who this man is, give our viewers a quick rundown on who this guy is and what he's generally known for throughout the world.
Well, some people are calling him the man behind the curtain, Brett.
Right.
I'd say he's the, objectively speaking, by both dollar value spent over many decades and the influence he's coveted in the media and elsewhere and in politics. I think it is objectively true that Soros is the most influential man in American politics. We don't have a comparable estimate for our government, but we know there's actually a series of leaked documents from Soros's Open Society Foundations in the past half decade or so, and one of them was sort of like this dossier of the European Union and their parliament. And it was it was so long ago I wrote about it, but it was close to 300 seats out of the 705 in European Parliament had some sort of connection to Soros, or at least Soros included them in a dossier with their information and viewed them as a reliable contact. So if they were an individual political party, Soros-backed representatives, they would be the largest single party in European Parliament. And I know we're talking about American politics, but my point is just, if that's European politics, what is our politics? And you can go on his son's Instagram and see him palling around with every Democrat that you can name. So I would say probably even more in our politics, given we're not a multi-party system.
Maybe describe how he is influencing American elections on a national level as well as a local level, and how that influences the life of the average American.
Right. Well, it's historically been more presidential elections and then, using mainstream media, and the media is already liberal. So he's really just sort of enhancing our existing narratives, or they're already sympathetic to the kind of views he pushes. So it makes it a lot easier. But fortunately, many of the presidential candidates he's backed, like Kerry and Clinton, have failed, and Al Gore and all those. So that's been positive for us. But where he's had the most success, and this has been the past decade or so, has been these state races where, let's be honest, no one pays attention to them at all. And I would imagine, of all of us talking about how bad it is that he's taking over these elections, I have never even known of a DA election I could vote in. So I'm obviously somewhat guilty myself, as sort of all of us. But he's had a lot of success there for that reason, that people don't pay attention. And it's hard to buy an election as much as we say people buy elections when it's a national election, because the turnout is hundreds of millions of people. So it's hard to move the needle. And everyone else is spending billions too. So if you spend 20 million, it's sort of a drop in the bucket. With the DA races, he will spend 10 times what the competitor will spend and just drown someone in cash. And the people he's backing are completely insane people who are anti-law and order, anti-cop, pro-criminal, for really reducing as many penalties as possible. And some of them might sanitize their beliefs and say, like, oh, we don't want to enforce speeding tickets when we could be solving murders. And I'm going, okay, well, where are you solving the murders? Because that enforcement goes down, sexual assault enforcement goes down, domestic abuse enforcement goes down. So if it really was this balancing act of, oh, you have too many small things on your plate to handle the big ones, you're not reallocating those resources, you're stopping all of them. And it is the same story anywhere those people go. Crime goes up, enforcement goes down. That is greatly oversimplifying it. But in the book, I detail in well, as much details I think is appropriate, who these people are, what they campaign on, and then the individual policies they implement, and kind of the hilariously tragic but predictable consequences.
Yeah, he sunk 40 million into local elections, and you've got, I think, over 70 DAs. He's gotten 70 DAs
so
elected.
74 now, because one got ousted, and then he denied ever funding him. It was Chesa Boudin in San Francisco. Right. But that's also some hope that if it's possible to be too liberal for San Francisco, and granted, it was a very close recall. I can't remember if it was like 55, 45, but it was closer than you'd think. But even then, they still got recalled in San Francisco, which is an equally insane place to live, and the people as well, unfortunately. Yeah. But at least it means they can be beaten. And the thing is, too, like, if we're in areas that are even marginally conservative, or I don't, maybe even more than 40, as long as a ratio is more than 60-40 in Democrats' favor, because the turnout is so low, I feel like we could mobilize 5 to 10% of the electorate to go, hey, vote against these people. I think that would be doable.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're talking about why it's easier to influence local rather than
Yeah.
national, and it's like 40 million. I mean, that's
Well,
nothing.
that's the thing. There's no legislative process. Like, if you want to pass gun control, one of the biggest problems for a gun control advocate is Congress debates it. It's all public. We can all watch. And what are we going to do? We're all going to run out and get the exact guns they're going to ban 6 months from now.
Right.
With the DAs, you just back a lunatic and just say, do this, and they do that. And that's pretty much how it goes. There's no accountability at all, really.
Describe kind of the 1-2 punch of these local DAs who are putting the hurt on cities they govern over. It's this obviously kind of this week on crime, and then you've got the defund the cops.
Oh, well, it's just every possible thing we know about criminology, they're doing the opposite. We know that, for instance, obviously having punishments is important, but even more important than punishments themselves and the severity is your probability of being caught. So if you get, a 1 month sentence for a crime and you're getting caught 99% of the time versus a 6 month sentence, you get caught 1 in 100 times, that's actually a case where a smaller punishment would be better, because at least you're catching them and taking them out of circulation, and at least they know there's a very high chance. So I am very for strict punishments, but even getting someone charged and being able to punish them is even more important, because the severity is useless if you can't enforce it. So he's just dropping, these prosecutors drop most cases. And as I said, they phrase it in terms of not enforcing speeding tickets and parking tickets, but then you actually go through the details. Like there was Buda, Bibaraj, Loudoun County, and you're going, that's how you phrased it, but you made it legal to escape from police and not show up to a court date. So what is that? Like, how does that work? And those are very, quote, low-level crimes that make it impossible to enforce any crime ever. So they're lying there. And then again, they compound it with the defund the police push, where most cities per capita have far fewer cops than European cities, and our European neighbors are far safer than ours, unfortunately. I think those two things might be correlated to some extent, obviously.
Sure.
But yeah, so it's just, you're not very likely to get caught because there's not a lot of cops, and most cops are demoralized and are not enforcing certain laws. And in fact, you see it show up in the least places you'd expect. Like after George Floyd, there was a pushback in policing, or pullback, and particularly against African Americans, and it was pronounced in things that are sort of stereotyped, like speeding tickets, where it is stereotyped that Black people are more likely to get speeding tickets, and it's not actually. I can go through why it's not true, but the perception is there, and cops stopped enforcing laws against Black drivers to an extent where, if you chart auto fatalities by race over the years, there is a noticeable increase in 2020 that has not stopped, specifically for Black people. So because laws were enforced less against them, they got in more accidents, which killed more Black people. And that's the exact correlation we see in the cities with other types of crimes. They are, even if you were to grant the premise that, let's say, Black people are the biggest victims of police brutality, well, they're also the biggest beneficiaries of the benefits of police, and the benefits far exceed the consequences.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to live in a bad neighborhood, that's for sure.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't buy the narrative that Black people are in fear of cops, because if you look at the polls in 2020, they were the most likely to say, no, don't cut the police here. It's sort of like a phenomenon with politicians, where everyone hates Congress, but everyone's own congressman has a high approval rating. So you have this thing where everyone individually is popular, but collectively everyone hates them. So they might espouse anti-cop views in the abstract, but when it comes to their actual police department, they want them there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, who are the worst offenders among the American DAs and politicians that Soros has financially backed and helped win? And what states and cities are really suffering the worst under their radical policies?
Well, it's definitely like Philadelphia, LA, San Francisco. The ones that, like, I don't know if I'd say they're the worst, but the ones that are committed to memory have sort of become household names. And I guess the talking point there is that, no one pays attention to local politics. So if you're a local politician who's famous, either you did something so uniquely awesome that it made the news everywhere for some reason, or B, and this is much more likely, you did something humiliatingly embarrassing over and over and over and are a repeat offender, and 99% of the time it's the latter one. So it's where else are DA's household names, or when else in history? And it's like only when we have people like Kim Gardner, who's targeting the McCloskeys for defending themselves against a mob with threat to kill them. We have Chesa Boudin, who just decided that For 10,000 years, we've been paying for things with money. Apparently, we're no longer doing that way of things. Time for a new era. We saw the consequences there. It got to the point, too, where there's no point in reporting crime. So it would look like shoplifting was going down at a time when, like, the cost to insure a store was going up and closures from shoplifting were skyrocketing. So it was sort of that statistical noise there. But
Right.
who else? Kim Foxx covered up the
Yeah.
Jesse Smollett case. Like, every single just wacky law and justice case you could possibly think of, Google the DA and it's backed by Soros, without exception.
You've also got George Gascon out in LA.
Yeah, who I don't get why these people go into the job when it's like normally there's a bias. Like, there's this phenomenon with death penalty cases where you have to tell the judge that you're okay in implementing it. Like, you have to be okay with the death penalty to serve in a death penalty jury, which means there's a bias and that generally pro-death penalty people are on those juries. So normally with judges, prosecutors, normally there's a pro-law enforcement bias, because why would you be a prosecutor if you're not against criminals? There's this whole wave of DAs who have the exact opposite approach, where it's, we view them as the victims and we're going to be prosecutors for the people perpetrating the crimes. And it is these people have to be mentally ill. There is just no other way to explain it. And that's what makes it hard for me when people say, like, how do you explain their motives? It's like, I don't know, because I don't think insane, but I just can't comprehend thinking in those terms.
Yeah, it's a bizarre phenomenon. You can go back to the 70s where you had similar trends, and it's like you said, the cop is the perp the perp, and the perp is the victim.
Yeah, and people always say that's the number one talking point. They say, listen, it's violent now, but it's not as bad as the 60s and 70s. And I'm going, you had the same thing. Like, you had your narrative there. It was really bad. And there was a crack cocaine epidemic, which made it worse, but it was really bad. We had the Giuliani era and that was a nationwide thing where we tightened up the laws. And the thing that people like, I hate when people on our side criticize Bill Clinton's crime bill, because we had a 75% reduction in violent crime with that crime bill, and shootings and all those sorts of crimes. And that bill resulted in hiring a ton of cops. I mean, the talking point is it put a lot of black people in jail, but the ones they put in jail were criminals. So that 90s was a reversal of that trend. It is only now 2010 onwards we're reversing that reversal, and it's starting to creep. But the line behind law and order is extremely thin, as we saw in 2020. And we are not far away. And in fact, you see it happen in the reverse too, where El Salvador once had the highest murder rate in the world. I think back in the 90s, it was like 150 murders per 100,000 people. Their murder rate as of this month is like a fourth of America's. And what do? They hired a ton of cops and they put 1% of their population in jail. So you do the opposite and you have the opposite effect. You loosen up law and order and you get the exact consequences you predict. The number of criminals in a society is usually a pretty fixed number. It's how much can they get away with, because it's not like it's one criminal means one crime. If crime in a neighborhood doubles, it's probably because the same criminals can get away with more. So that's the thing too, is by keeping a very small segment of population out of circulation, there's a ripple effect in reducing crime.
You said in a recent op-ed that Soros is controlling Biden. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's pretty easy to say. The guy has moved very far left. There was actually an article about a top Open Society Foundation director right after that got published, visiting the White House 13 times. 17 of Biden's transition team members were linked to Soros. Neera Tanden is linked to Soros. Anthony Blinken is linked to Soros. Ron Klain's chief of staff is linked to Soros. And it does not mean that Soros is on the phone telling them every single day, tell them to do this, but there are degrees of influence that are going to rub off in that chain of command on Biden. And it is clear just from the cartoonish progressive policies. The idea that an 80-year-old man is pondering the plight of transgender people, of men who think they're men and who think they're women and chop their penises off, is just a surreal thing to think. He himself on a Tuesday afternoon went, wow, these people, we really don't give them enough credit. It is inconceivable. So there is someone in his ear with these wacky progressive issues that really only a college kid could believe.
What do you think motivates a man like Soros to spend all this money, basically subvert American justice and the American way of life? I mean, do you think? Let me not. Do you think he's a true believer?
One answer. Go ahead.
No, but seriously, do you think do you think he's like a true believer that his motives are ultimately over the long term going to help America, or do you think there's something more sinister?
I think it's more sinister. If you think his motives are good, explain to me how. Like, I don't know if you saw the
Yeah,
Twitter thread they did about me yesterday. One of the Open Society communications directors,
it
and
was great.
they were like, Mr. Palumbo should have contacted us more in his reporting. And I'm like, but you didn't. They don't respond to anything I say. They just do buzzwords like he helps the equality and women and people and communities, and it's great. I'm going to define any of those words because they mean
They
whatever you want.
mentioned that you were working outside of journalistic norms, so I mean,
But we know how
at
much you
that
guys
point,
love the truth. Yeah, give me a
at
break.
that point, I knew that there was nothing that there was going
Yeah,
to be gleaned from this that was going to be worth
yeah.
anything.
And then I did a whole article mocking how they call everyone they disagree with anti-Semitic, and they were like, "Well, maybe if he didn't want to be called anti-Semitic, he shouldn't have attacked us." And I'm like, "But that's the point of the article. Can you people stupid?" And then they must have sent an email blast out because I look at all the people retweeting it and their commentary, and it's some variant. It's as if an email went out that said like, "Hey, Laura is under attack by this Palumbo guy. Give her a hand on Twitter, but it's getting kind of bad."
Yeah, marshal the forces.
Yeah, pretty much. And like, there's
Yeah,
all these people telling me I'm worthless scum, and I'm like, I'm glad you think so because if you thought otherwise, I would have a problem.
you're not doing your job otherwise,
I'm not
dude.
doing my job if they don't hate me. But no, and I mean, I guess another motive would be money. Do I think Soros would do the exact same thing for the right if the incentives were such that he could influence it? Actually, yes. And if it was for good, I wouldn't be complaining. That's the thing you got to realize. It's not hypocrisy. It's picking a side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the deal with his son? Can we expect his son to
He's
take over and kind of carry on in his father's footsteps after George is who's an old man after he passes on?
he kind of already is.
Mhm.
He seems to be the one active, taking photos with every. It's a who, I think I said earlier, it's a who's of Democrat politicians and pundits. He really seems to be everywhere. He doesn't get back to my emails, but he has time for a lot of other things. And he also retweeted that thread complaining about me, which was funny.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's you can't get better endorsements like that.
No, it's great. I'm telling you, Alex, you want to get dinner? You're paying, but I'm down.
He can afford it.
He can definitely afford it. We'll go to wherever he wants, and maybe they'll kill me. I don't know.
He can write it off.
Probably.
Give us your elevator speech on your new book, The Man Behind the Curtain.
I think everyone watching this has a general idea of who Soros is. There are things he will be blamed for where it seems implausible or hyperbolic. And the point of the book is just to say, here's everything we do know about the guy, and it is more than enough. There's no need to exaggerate or people call me a conspiracy theorist. I say it's conspiracy facts because it's public information. It's not, and he can take issue with me connecting the dots, but his excuses aren't even believable. Like one of the rebuttals they gave in that thread I mentioned was they were like, it is true Soros has given grants to employ these journalists, but Mr. Palumbo should know there are rules where they can't influence their coverage. Like as if they're going to go, hey, Mr. Journalist, here's $10 million. FYI, it can't influence your coverage.
Well,
all right, thanks, guys.
Isn't it about who he's giving these grants to? I mean, I don't see him giving any grants to right of center reporters or anybody who might be critical of what he does.
And also, the talking point I give on the radio is go on any of these websites where I link him to, type Soros's name in the search bar, find me one negative article. Like clearly your money is having an impact because billionaires should be a fair game to criticize, and somehow one of them, he's the only man that's racist to criticize in the entire world of all billionaires.
Where can people find The Man Behind the Curtain?
Number one is Amazon, but I know obviously a lot of conservatives try to avoid it, myself included. Barnes & Noble online and obviously in person should have it, but online is kind of a guarantee. You never know in person. And then I guess I'll give the wherever books are sold answer. I think pretty much Walmart, Target, Books a Million. I don't know who in the world has ever bought a book from there, but if you're so inclined, you can be the first.
Right on. Well, sadly, we're out of time. Matt, go ahead and give everyone your social media coordinates as well as where they can find you and your work.
Hi, Matt Palumbo 12. I am likely already tagged in the video you're watching, which would be helpful. And then also we run, me and Brett together, BonginoReport.com. Very good updates from Brett this afternoon. He's doing a good job.
Thanks, dude.
You bet.
We'll have you back. We'll do this again. Thanks again.
You bet, man. All right. Talk to you soon.